Arabian Nights, like Arabian days. More often than not, hot, hotter than hot, in a lot of good ways. Yeah, that's right. We're talking about OP Games, Sorcerer's Arena, Epic Alliances is the core set sent to me by OP Games. What do you need to know? Is it right for you? How hot is it? Should it be replacing? Should it be taking the place of anything else? Should it just be the way to go if you're looking at a two-player dueling game? Let's talk. So when I talk about other two-player dueling games, I think of things like, well, Exceed, and then you have things like Unmatched, and things that are of that ilk. But when you have a game like this, that's deck-driven, which is great, but it's sort of two-dimensional. You know, you go back and forth across the line, BattleCon, Exceed, just sort of not the three-dimensional element that gives more tactical, but even more strategic nature to these games. And even Unmatched, which is, you know, the next level of Star Wars Epic Duels, the re-implementation from Restoration Games. You know, they've started putting out characters like this that people are more aware of. You know, the legends are great and all, but not everybody knows who Alibaba was. Not everybody knows who Cobble and Fog are. And so that's not going to get the passerby coming down the game aisle to go, well, Cobble and Fog, I think that looks like a very interesting game. Let me check that one out. No, it's not going to do that. It doesn't have the attention. And some days, I just don't feel like getting this bad boy out with literally, you know, the massiveness that it is in terms of the rules, the layering, the drafting, the everything that goes along with this. This is an underhauling. This is a whole game night in and of itself. And sometimes you just don't feel like doing that, right? And so you're looking for something else along those lines. Where do all of those things sort of Venn diagram and converge? And that's why we're talking about, as this thing falls off, this thing today. Because this has the eye test appeal. Meaning, I walk down the aisle and I instantly say what you want about Disney, say what you want about whatever property that you want to look at around here on the bottom is. It passes the eye test of going, well, I know that. I'm familiar with that. Should I be interested in it? And that's point number one, is that has to be, nowadays, to stand out amongst the crowd, you have to have something that's eye-catching. Now, apart from this, which I really don't like whatsoever, it's relatively straightforward, right? This is the game. This is akin to Unmatched. It's akin to Star Wars Epic Duels. But what sets it apart, and why do I make the argument right now in front of you guys, is point number two. This is the best entry point, the best multi-level tiered game of those that are out there right now. The main take-home point I'm going to give you is coming straight from this, right? This is the rulebook, the Summoner's Handbook, and I'm just going to flip right here, right to the beginning, and this is going to illustrate my point in case you're not familiar with it at all. Right here, it says 4 chapters. Basically, you can learn the basics, you can unlock all 8 characters, you can introduce more of a detailed setup right there, and then that completes the full game with better upgrades, abilities, and everything else in between. Then you can even play 2-on-2 if you want, but no, let's not kid ourselves. This is a 1 versus 1 game. I mean, I appreciate that a lot of these team games allow us to do, 2 versus 2, but really, when I play one of these games, I want full control on my side of things. And so this is really a 1 versus 1 game for me, regardless. Now, it comes with standees, which are fantastic. The price point is much better too from that aspect. But let's talk about those chapters. Let's talk about what you need to know. Unlike Exceed, you have a small deck. I mean, this is not a big deck of cards. What is this? 10 cards overall. I mean, the art is fine. It looks like it's from the movies themselves, which isn't a huge deal or very facsimile of. And you only have about, 4 or 5 different card types overall. So there's enough there, but there's not too much there like Exceed, where you're still learning the cards through the first couple times you're playing them. Whereas in this game, you're going to know everything that's there in, one game without ever questioning it. And they've got the little health dials on the bottom. You've got these little rings here that allow you to sort of move it along the bottom to keep track of the health. So that's all great. You've got all your conditions up here of the different conditions that are going to be involved. And, all that stuff is well and good. But those levels of learning allow me to say, okay, son, what am I going to do? We're going to play just with, one side or the other. We're going to play without this card actually even first. And you're just going to draw cards and you're going to take your card actions. And there are basic actions that you can move or you can attack and do a damage. And then you keep track of it here. And these are used not only for your keeping track of your health, how many victory points you get if you knock the person out, but also their initiative. So all of that is relatively straightforward. All of the characters have one of these. All of the characters have this. So then the next level after that is, essentially you're going to be adding in the character card, where the character card now changes maybe the standard value or standard actions that you're going to have. And then it adds a skill. So skill, great, no problem. Just one more thing gives you a little more sense of where things are at up here in this corner. So, as you're moving across, you can keep track and everyone knows what's what. And then for the next level, you have the ability to gather these sort of cards, which are based on, as I'm clearly keeping the right sign, you can see in the lower right-hand corner, they have those symbols. Those symbols line up to these. If you get a certain number of these played, then you get to flip this over, get this special protector, special ability card, which is all asymmetric. Sounds easy, sounds simple, but there's a lot of nuance because of this three-dimensional moving around, because of how these characters are asymmetric. It really gives a very good feel. And I would argue that the thematic incorporation of characters like Mickey, Sorcerer Mickey here, for example, he is a glass cannon. Right? That's the stereotypical trope that we use on a lot of the video games, where he's really good from far. He doesn't have much health comparatively. Like Sully has 11, he only has 8. He gives you less victory points, but he's also going to be definitely not nearly as good in melee, and it shows. So those are the things that you need to know. And they're all relatively asymmetric. Ariel is going to allow you to heal. She allows one character to recover a heart. And so all of the decks are different enough, and having 8 characters, and that's the other big difference here. 8 freaking characters. That's the big problem with Unmatched. That's a big advantage over this as well. The other thing I'll say with this setup is that, you only have this many cards, right? So if you can never draw a card, the game is over. If someone scores their 12th victory point, the game is over. And you can already see that Aladdin is 6 victory points right here. So this is not a long game. This is a 30-minute game. When it says 30 minutes, it means 30 minutes or less. And the turns are relatively straightforward, right? So I have my Aladdin character card here. I'm drawing my card, and then I have a movement and an action phase. So you can either take the standard of either the movement or the action that's available to you on every single turn, or I'm looking through my cards in my hand and okay, I have a move one here. Move 4 spaces. Aladdin may pass through rivals while moving. If each one that's passed through puts a random card from their hand back on the top of their deck. Great. Oh, and then maybe I'm going to do this one as my second action. But this is going to be using a lot of my cards. And like I said, you only have 10 cards. So if you can't get cards, the game's over. That's the basic gist of the game. Now, then you throw in, like I mentioned, these status effects that are going to go right alongside this thing. Because all they do is they get slotted in right here like this, and they get stacked up, and you put tokens on them, and then they get removed. As you go through the initiative order, you get to remove one, and then rinse and repeat. Lastly, can I just say, not having to always go back to the rules and actually having individual reference cards for chapters 3 and 4, those upgrades, so it runs you through it right here, as well as chapter 1 reference and chapter 2 reference, is amazing. I love this. It needs to have more in terms of just accessibility. OP Games has smashed it out of the park with all of these things in terms of learning, in terms of accessibility, and as well as upgrades between being able to play this with my kids because of chapter 1, maybe chapter 2, and being able to play with my wife or my gamer group with chapter 3 and chapter 4. Now, I'll say there is definitely a slight learning curve, but it's all relatively intuitive, and you cannot understate intuitivity. And you cannot understate the intuitive nature of needed in some of these games, because that's also the biggest barrier when it comes to teaching BattleCon or Exceed or Yomi or Sakura Arms, is the learning curve is there. So if I've played several games already, I'm going to have a significant advantage. And in this game, because of the simplicity, because the tactical nature is much heavier, the learning curve is a lot lower, or I should say the playing field is more even for people who are not in it as much already. And so that's great. The other thing I'll say is having 8 of these different characters, having 8 characters all in one core box with the standees. This is the other reason I think this is a much better entry point, a much better value as well from a retail side of things. Because, if I look at any of the other ones, right? I'm going to be paying... Star Wars Epic Duels has a ton of characters, but you can't get a good copy for like $75 or maybe probably more like $100 at this point. Unmatched is going to cost you, 30 bucks, 35 bucks for like 4 characters. So overall, when you're looking at this compared to Unmatched, you're only going to get 4 players in about a $40 game from Unmatched, whereas $40 to $50 right now from OP will get you 8 characters that you're more familiar with that are unique. I mean, this is no different than Unmatched in that sense, because all of these offer a different thematic incorporation. There's innovative buffs, there's debuffs, the timing, the initiative that I mentioned, the different values in terms of if you knock a character out. And so that affects the drafting of your characters in that sense. Do I want ones that are going to be able to stay around longer, but when they get knocked out, the opponent is definitely going to get a big boon? Or do I draft lower value characters and, you really try and just stack it up on that end? It's really a great system in terms of that. You also saw on the grid that I did not mention, those 3 yellow squares in the middle that also are going to be providing just, a point if you're standing there essentially on your turn, which is very intuitive, very easy, but it's not overwhelming at the same time. My main criticism of the Fire Emblem house I talked about a couple months ago was that just the area control style of it led to just a slug fight over one area in particular on the board, and it was just a back and forth and kind of sitting around that one area the whole time. This is not like that. You will definitely have to move in and out of those areas, because if you don't, you will suffer. What does this game need? What does this game lack? And is this game going to be for you? Similarly, the biggest downside I would say with this right now is you only have this one map setup. There is not a double-sided board like there is with Unmatched, and so you're not going to get as much variability on the terrain or the board itself, which would be the main thing I would be looking for. Now, they've already announced 2 expansions with more characters, but I would argue I would probably pay for an expansion for a different board or terrain to give me something again that was a layer, because as you've done with the chapters, you can layer this stuff on very nicely without having to do a whole lot of more rule learning in that aspect at that point. I would argue that this is a little bit less clunky, and this is the big take-home message that I heard someone say elsewhere, and I'm going to copy this because I love it. I love this phrase. The pay to fun ratio is incredibly high on this game. And so if nothing else, if any of those other concepts are intriguing to you and you do not have something else like this, I would argue that this is the best place to learn a game like this and then perhaps proceed to something else, maybe like the next step up of Summoner Wars 2nd Edition, or BattleCon, or Yomi, or Exceed, or something along those lines, or maybe the upcoming, we'll see if it's any good, Senjutsu as well, because that's the same concept that this game is going for, but the execution is still yet to be known. One last point here. The tempo of this game, the card play, unlike some of the other systems that are out there, there's really no defense system in this. It's just changing the tempo, changing the arrangement, and changing the speed of the game as a whole, and using those statuses, but debuffs to your best advantage, because you're not going to be able to hit the brakes. And so how can you best manage that? So it offers a different dynamic because of that. The last aspect is you are going to be playing every character. With some of those other games out there, akin to the slug 'em back and forth, like I mentioned with Fire Emblem, or the other one, Super Fantasy Brawl, or whatever it may be, Summoner Wars, where you get 1 or 2 units that are super powerful and you are sticking with them, and the other one's sort of laid by the wayside. This doesn't happen in this game, because every character gets a turn every round. If you get knocked out, they come back in. And so there's no downtime or losing a character or loss in that aspect. So it's great, and the dynamics are, just fantastically well balanced. And so I give you a lot of kudos, OP Games, for putting this out there and really doing a great job on it. This is now the standard bearer, I would say, for not only entry-level 2-player skirmish games, if you will, but I would say the bar has been raised on what else needs to come out there to surpass this, especially when you play at the full Chapter 4 level. So there you go. Those are my final thoughts on it. All in all, this is a tremendously great surprise. I looked at this and I was judging a little bit by the cover initially, and I think a lot of people are going to do that, but I highly recommend that you do not, because this is going to be a sleeper hit for a lot of people that have any interest in this genre, and the Disney appeal is going to get a lot more people who otherwise wouldn't have looked at this in the first place into a game like this, and it's going to work, and it's going to work well, and it's going to stay around for a long time. So there you go. That is Disney Sorcerers Alliance from OP Games. Check it out if you're interested. Let me know if you have any questions or comments down in the comment section below. Thank you, OP Games, for sending me a copy. Regardless, this is a great game. I would highly recommend this. As I mentioned, again, too lazy, didn't watch the rest of the video. Final point here, pay to fun ratio, incredibly high in this game. There you go. Stay classy. Have a great day. I'll see you around.